well as the transmission of data to a computer or electronic device by any inmate. Further, this new section makes it an offence for an inmate who, notwithstanding any lawful authority to have access to or use of or possession of a computer or electronic communication device, tampers with or intercepts or causes the interception of their functions. It is proposed, Mr. President, that these offences attract severe penalties. Given the severity of the offences and the current exacerbation of criminal activities through the utilization of electronic communication devices and computers, upon conviction in a parish court, it is proposed that a penalty of a fine not exceeding $3 million or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 3 years or both such fine and imprisonment be imposed. For a second subsequent offence, it is proposed that a fine not exceeding $5 million or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 5 years, both such fine and imprisonment be imposed. In the case of conviction in a circuit court for the commission of a first offence, it is proposed that a fine or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 7 years or to both such fine and imprisonment be imposed. In the case of a second subsequent offence, a fine or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 15 years or to both such fine and imprisonment is proposed, and that would have been an amendment from the original bill tabled in the lower house as suggested by Leader of the Opposition, Mark Golding. Mr. President, it is further proposed that a new section be inserted which makes it an offence for any person who uses a computer or electronic communication device to prejudice the safety or security of any person inside or outside the correctional institution, as well as the good order or security of a correctional institution. Similar to the proposed aforementioned offence, it is proposed that this offence attract severe penalties again. Upon conviction in a parish court, it is proposed that the penalty of a fine not exceeding $3 million or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 3 years or both such fine and imprisonment be imposed. For a second or subsequent offence, it is proposed that a fine not exceeding $5 million or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 5 years or both such fine and imprisonment be imposed. In the case of conviction in a circuit court for the commission of a first offence, it is proposed that a fine or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 15 years or to both such fine and imprisonment be imposed. In the case of a second offence, second or subsequent offence, a fine or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 20 years to both such fine and imprisonment. And again, this was a recommendation for amendment that was accepted by the government coming from the Leader of the Opposition in the lower house. Clause 10, Mr. President, it is being proposed that Section 82 is amended by inserting a new provision which allows for the penalties in the regulations to exceed the penalty provided in Section 29(1)(b) of the Interception Act and impose a fine of $3 million or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years. Mr. President, it is reiterated that the imposition of these higher penalties is to deter the commission of these offences. Clause 11, Mr. President, the Principal Act is further amended by inserting a new section which allows that the Minister may, subject to affirmative resolution, to amend the monetary penalties specified in the Act. Mr. President, this is necessary as it is still the intent to make penalties under the Act a disincentive even when the value of the currency changes over time. Clause 12, Mr. President, the Principal Act is amended by inserting a new section which prescribes protocols for the treatment of confiscated prohibited articles and the disposal of same. In this regard, it is proposed that cash which is found secreted by or on an inmate or within a correctional institution shall be confiscated and paid to the Accountant General. Further, it is proposed that a new rule be inserted to provide for the treatment of prohibited articles that are computers and electronic communication devices. Computers and electronic communication devices shall be handed over to the Commissioner of Police upon the receipt of prohibited articles, that is a computer or electronic communication device. The Commissioner of Police shall cause an investigation to be conducted and determine the purpose for which it was accessed or used. The Commissioner of Police shall then make a written report to the Commissioner of Corrections stating the findings of the investigation. It is further proposed that an investigation reveals, it is further proposed that where an investigation reveals that the computer or electronic communication device was used in the commission of an offence, same shall be stored by the Commissioner of Police as evidence for the purposes of criminal proceedings. On the other hand, where an investigation reveals that the computer or electronic communication device was not used in the commission of an offence, same shall be destroyed or disposed of by the Commissioner of Police. Additionally, upon the conclusion of criminal proceedings in which the computer or electronic communication device was stored and adduced as evidence, the Director of Public Prosecutions shall apply to the court for an order authorizing the Commissioner of Police to destroy or dispose of the computer or electronic communication device. Prior to the destruction or disposal of a computer or electronic communication device, the amendment to the rules will enable the Commissioner of Police to make a report to the Commissioner of Corrections, and where they were stored for the purpose of criminal proceedings, the Commissioner of Police shall not destroy or dispose of same without an order of the court authorizing such destruction or disposal. Mr. President, it is further proposed that a provision be included for the prohibited articles which fall outside of the scope of cash, computers, or electronic communication devices. These prohibited articles will be confiscated by the superintendent and be put in safekeeping at the correctional center and returned to the inmate upon his discharge or destroyed or disposed of, having regard to the provisions of the rules, nature of the item, the likelihood that it was or will be used to prejudice the life or safety of any person, facilitate the escape or attempted escape from a correctional institution, or prejudice the discipline of a correctional center. This is in line with best practices internationally, Mr. President. It is further being proposed that a register be kept at each correctional center, which outlines particular details of each confiscated prohibited article in relation to all prohibited articles. This register shall outline the name of the inmate in relation to whom the discovery was made, the date of confiscation, and the circumstances in relation to the discovery and confiscation of the prohibited articles. For prohibited articles which are cash, the register will also need to indicate the amount of cash confiscated and the date on which it was handed over to the Accountant General. Additionally, for prohibited articles which are computers or electronic communication devices, the register will need to include a description of the computer or the electronic communication device and the date on which it was handed over to the Commissioner of Police. Further, in the case of prohibited articles other than cash, a computer, or an electronic communication device, the register ought to indicate a description of the prohibited article, the name of the superintendent, the recommendation of the superintendent, and the date on which such recommendation was made, the terms of the direction of the Commissioner, the date on which the prohibited articles was put into safekeeping, destroyed, or disposed of, and any other particulars as the Commissioner may specify. And should the question arise as to whether this would need to be included in regulations, it does not, as it would be included in the correction rules, which is amended. It is to be noted, Mr. President, that similar provisions will be required of the Commissioner of Police. Upon the receipt of a confiscated computer or electronic communication device, the Police Commissioner will keep a register outlining the name of the inmate in relation to whom the discovery of the computer or electronic device was made, a description of the computer or electronic communication device, the date on which it was received by the Commissioner of Police, the date of any order of the court authorizing the Commissioner of Police to destroy or dispose of it, the manner of destruction or disposal of the computer or electronic communication device, and the date on which such destruction or disposal was done. Mr. President, Clause 13. It is also to be noted that the amendment made to the Corrections Act will also result in consequential amendments to the Fingerprints Act to include sections 80A and 80B of the Corrections Act. This amendment will address prohibited access to or use of a computer or electronic communication device, as well as the tampering or interception of these instruments, and their use to prejudice the safety or security of any person inside or outside the correctional institution, the safe custody or security of an inmate, as well as the good order or security of a correctional institution, which attracts penalties for second or subsequent offences. Mr. President, this ends a clause-by-clause summary of the bill before you. Before I commend the bill for contributions of colleagues, I wish to reiterate the fact that this is an urgent bill. We have seen an increase in activity of those behind bars who seek to harm our citizens. Now, a bill on paper alone will not solve the issues that we face. It is how the bill is operationalized. As I have given commendations in the past for the work on the DNA legislation, which would have been tabled and taken by Senator Bunting, it is the operationalizing of it after by the appropriate investments and training that make it work. The appropriate investments and training are being programmed. Some have been made. There are more to come in the next fiscal year. But beyond that, members should not have an illusion that we have been unable to find these devices. The issue is that the consequences did not match the issues that they were creating. Because in the last 12 months, and maybe not exact 12 months, but for a 12-month period, we were able to find and remove over 2,000 phones from our correctional facilities. I said so in my State of the Nation. So the search teams are working. The change in procedures at entryways have stopped several devices entering our facilities. We need to give the correctional services the tools. We need to give the tools to the hard-working men and women who are correctional officers, who are non-uniformed staff. Because 99% of them are great people. They're patriots. They don't settle for this sort of nonsense. But we need to ensure that we weed out the bad ones, and that we ensure that that the police and the correctional services have the tools to deal with this. So I commend this to colleagues. I look forward to contributions in the debate, and I hope that I'm able to get the support of colleagues when the bill is put to a vote later on.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Brown.
Mr. President, you'll note that this bill has been presented to us same day and taken through all its stages same day, without demur on this side. It's the type of cooperation you get when you extend respect to the side. We cooperate in taking it through all its stages today, partly because the Minister Samuda, did make contact with the leader of government business, of opposition business at Portel in the future, spoke to him about the urgency, and we were prepared to take it last week if the other place had taken it days before. So when people get up and say countries on a knife edge and that we are not supporting the fight against crime, this is a clear example that we are against crimes. We're against the criminals. Sometimes it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And I commend the minister for his approach to the opposition in dealing with this bill. Mr. President, this bill seeks to make amendments to an act that is 36 years old, 1985. A whole generation grew up on it. And to modify rules that are 30 years old, 1991. So, as somebody who represents some of the workers in the correctional services, I also want to appeal to you, Minister, that having regard for the maxim, ignorance is no defense, that we do some sensitization of the workers inside the institutions so that they are aware of these serious changes and that these changes are life-saving, including their own lives. We are aware of the recent events in Trinidad and Tobago, where it's been ordered from the prison and correctional officers. We saw the video of a correctional officer and his child in the street, and the correctional officer being gunned down. We know of cases in our own country where correctional officers traveling on public transportation have been killed because they look like a police, since they are required to be clean shaven and so forth. So the life of correctional officers are at risk also. And if you do not comply with the criminals inside, you may become a target when you are on the outside. So it's important that we sensitize the staff to these things. Another thing, Minister, which you and I, again, we have cooperated, is the matter of transportation. And suffice it to say, I and the staff appreciate the most recent information you provide to me. And I hope that we can work long term so that we remove the staff from having to travel in the public transportation and making them a risk. Because the criminals behind bars are sophisticated. And while they are behind bars, they have tentacles out in the street that can do harm to our people. So I'd urge, Minister, that we put in place transportation, just as we have seen for the police, so that we can give a sense of security to the correctional officers. We support the bill, but I must say, Minister, this bill would be in better stead if we had not, as a country, well, not as a country, as opportunists some of us were, in rejecting the offer to build a brand new prison in our country. It couldn't be on us to negotiate with Dave Cameron or this government good friend Boris Johnson. Revision in the terms of that prison. Because let us be clear, Senator Hill. Prison or no prison accepted, the deportees are coming from UK. Coming every month, almost. So, if it was to prevent deportees coming, we lost that battle. If it was to build schools, as the opposition leader then said we should choose schools over prison, we haven't gotten the schools. We haven't gotten schools. We use the money for irrigation. Yeah, let me look at Senator here. We use the money that Cameron brought for irrigation, but we refuse the prison part of the donation. That prison would be a modern prison, which could build isolation cells, which could keep these criminals who are giving instructions out there locked down, as I saw in Canada when I visit as part of the Correctional Service delegation, Correctional Service facilities in Toronto, where the hardened criminals are locked down for 24 hours, 23 hours. All out for exercise, fed inside the cells, but incapable of making contact with their cronies to kill people outside. When I looked at that prison, Senator Samuda, just the design of the prison, circular in shape. Senator Bunting, no two doors can be open at the same time. For door 1 to be open, door 2, 3, and 4 has to be closed. And for any of the other doors to be open, the others have to be closed. A modern prison. requiring less staff, driven heavily by technology. If Damion's goat can be protected by electric fence, we could stop the escapes be it from lockups, be it a man to be deported just walking out. So a new prison, which we refuse, would have made these rules, this change we will bring in this bill, more effective. Instead, what we have, Senator Samuda, be it district prison, be it general penitentiary, to our street adult, is you can just pass on the road and fling anything over. And it's secreted. It gets to who it must get to. So again, because it's not our intention to make controversy of this bill. But we want to make it clear that the intercept of communication legislation that was brought in by a previous PNP government must be part of the tool that you use now to catch those who are using the phones from inside the prison. We had the vision, we had the foresight, we had the courage, despite the opposition then, to pass the Interception of Communication Act, because we're serious about crippling the criminals. We passed it, and it's available for you to use now. And no doubt, when you say to us, if persons are found to be ordering it's from inside the prison, one would expect that the Interception of Communication Act would be a big part of the tool that you use. I believe we put in the search teams as part of what we had called Caribbean Search Team, all aimed at fighting crimes, getting the criminals, overcoming them. So, you have our support, but we are disappointed that you never took the new prison. It couldn't be that we couldn't shape it in our own fashion. It couldn't be that our negotiators were so weak and the others so intransigent that they would make adjustment. I've heard Senator Bunting, and I've been around for a long time, that we're going to build prison here, we're going to do a boot, build, operate, transfer. And I know my friend Senator Samuda is going to tell us today, we're going to be building prison. Senator Morris, not Floyd, but the younger Morris. I would have loved to say, not in my lifetime, but I don't know how long I'm going to live for. But you're going to live long, you're young. And I'm prepared to wager a bet if they don't call it unparliamentary and disrespectful, because that's what they say when I talk. I'm unparliamentary and I'm disrespectful. I'm willing to wager a bet that in your lifetime, a new prison will not be built. Ignore the statement about a prison to be built in Trelawney. Prison don't pay, don't win votes. But Peter Bunting had the courage to say, votes or no vote, the nation needs a new, modern, secure prison. And we started negotiations for that. Politics is a strange thing, Senator Samuda. Strange, strange thing. And I'm going to come back later on. People present or not present, to talk about another other matter we're going to talk about, how politics played its way to it becoming an issue on the agenda. Because when we talk about the dealing with prohibited items, or we deal with board's appointment, or we deal with MOCA. The genesis of those things was not yesterday. It wasn't the day before. They were years before. So, the new prison. Could I ask you, Minister, and I know this is being provocative, when are we going to get a new prison to replace the dungeons of Spanish Town and the dungeons of Tower Street? Oh, Senator Gill, President, what a beautiful waterfront we have if we had the courage to mash down Tower Street Adult Correction Services. Having built a new prison to house them. Oh, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be looking over a brand new skyscrapers and era with new investment coming in to get us to prosperity, to get us to 5 in 4. But political cowardice, political opportunism denied the country, not the PNP, the country, of a modern prison to replace the slave dungeons, which we now call prisons and correction center. This is not to say you're not trying a thing at Tamarind Farm, modern infirmary. But when you look at the big picture, Minister, when you look at the big picture, we're housing our people in dungeons. What's the age of Tower Street? What's the capacity of Tower Street? What's the age of district prison in Spanish Town? My fear, Minister, and I said it before when we reject the new prison, is that one man will wake up, not a tornado as it, the towns in Oklahoma, in Kentucky, but a little hurricane, a little earthquake, and the country would say, we made a mistake. We made politics interfere with a brand new prison. We support this bill, and you have our support. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I shall make very brief comments on this bill that is before us today, an act to amend the Corrections Act. And like my colleague, Senator Brown, I also want to state that on this side we give our full support to this bill. You see, Minister Samoda, we think that the provisions in this bill are so very important and timely. I don't know if Senator Bunting recall, many years ago, I shared with him a concern I had. He was then minister, and we were at a very important place. And I shared with him a concern I had regarding persons using cell phones in prison. I really did not have any idea then that this was really almost like a way of life. And I was very shocked when I discovered that it's just pretty much is the norm. And he had some very wise words then in terms of what is happening and how it ought to be treated. So I really wanted to say something today because I understood then and I understand now the challenge that exists and the real effect it can have on persons. And so there are two things I want to say, Minister, in that regard. Firstly is I noticed that there is in fact provisions which I support in terms of persons who are caught. But I wondered whether, and I mean, the debate will continue beyond today, but I wondered whether the penalty is serious enough. And I'm not one of those persons who thinks that increasing fines or extending term, imprisonment term is going to be the solution. But because we know the very real problem that exists, I am not convinced that the penalty of I think $3 million or 3 years is sufficient to act as a deterrent in this instance. I'm not asking, I'm not going to delay the matter, but I'm hopeful that when it comes up for discussion in another 2 or 3 years for review, that we can take a look at it. Because, and Senator Brown spoke about the real fact that a lot of people lose their lives because of what is plot and what is instructed from behind prison walls. And so we've got to be more stringent in that regard. The second thing as well, Senator Samuda, and I know you have been, in your portfolio, have been doing significant work in that regard. And I heard the discussion about the support or the resources that have been placed inside our prisons. But I am not hearing enough about the resources or the checks and balances that are going to be done pre-prison. Because the fact is that, when I say pre-prison, I'll explain to you. The fact is that somebody must take in the cell phone or the computer. Somebody has to do it. No, I have not been, to a lockup outside of the holding areas in Halfway Tree and Constant Spring. So I am not I'm not even aware of what goes on there in terms of the checks and the searches. But I wonder whether or not we are doing enough or we're doing effective searches when families and friends visit to ensure that these contrabands are not brought in. And, I say that because I am aware of one particular situation where at least, 2 or 3 phones were utilized while in prison, and I don't know how it happens. And I think that we have got to get back to the place where stringent security and stringent searches are done at that point before they enter. In my own reading, I noticed that in the United States, for example, one of the things that they talk about in terms of phones and how phones get into prison is the use of drones. So you have your family members and your friends who are going to sneak it in, whether in your clothes or in your meals or whatever means. But also by the use of drones as well, where they will drop it somewhere in the prison yard and the person picks it up. I don't know the extent, or if at all, that it is used in Jamaica. But I wondered, Minister, whether that is where our thinking needs to be, just go beyond the regular things as we know it. And I wondered as well, how do we deal with the charging of phones? And it's very creative because, again, in my reading, one of the things that I discovered is that you don't even need to plug in your phone for it to be charged. Sometimes you can. Yes, Senator Braham, I was surprised myself. Sometimes, and again from reading, that what they do is they take out the batteries and they connect it to the electricity, the light switch, but also that you can actually connect 2 batteries back to back and you wire it. So I share that, Minister Samud, and I'm quite sure you're very familiar with most of the research out there. Because if we are truly serious about tackling all these issues, we have got to ensure that we do not leave any loophole at all to encourage unwittingly, unknowingly, this kind of thing. And finally, because of the reality that we face daily, and whereas we have to commend the men and women of the correctional services, the fact is that we live in a society where there are no perfect beings. And though it is not an excuse, I would want to suggest that apart from the training that Senator Brown spoke of and which you indicated that will commence shortly, that sufficient support is given to all our men and women in the correctional services so that to the best of their will, they are not tempted. What I mean by that, again, just being realistic, is we do know, Senator Samuda, that there is money in crime. There's undoubtedly money in crime, eh? It does pay. And we also know that persons who want to get something done will get it done because they will have money and they have influence, whether inside or outside. What we have to do is to ensure that we almost insulate the men and women in our services so that they are not tempted. It means that we have to ensure that they're well paid, we have to ensure that all the support services, and it will never be perfect, it will never be enough, but at least to ensure that the possibility of them being lured by financial or material gains are limited because they would have been sufficiently provided for. And I don't have to drill down to all the details because you and Senator Brown would have spoken outside of here and all those other support. But I think it is something that we have to look into, because taking it out of the correctional services for one moment, the fact is that when we talk about corruption in our society, we talk about the fact that corruption is enabled by the bureaucracy. But we also talk about the fact that some of the persons who work in our service, whether public or private service, are not properly remunerated. And so it should not be an excuse. And it's not something I support, but it is a reality. They're not properly remunerated. And so they are very happy to receive any additional incentive that they can get. We, I believe, have to create an environment so that that does not become a reason, or that is not the reason for them to give support to persons who want to run afoul of the law. With that being said, Mr. President, I just want to say that I support this. I support the amendments that are before us today. And Minister, I do hope that, in the next review, that some of the matters that I raise would be brought to their attention and dealt with, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. You stuck within your time.
I did, Mr. President. I did say I was going to be short.
Minister? Oh, Senator Braham? Minister?
Mr. President, you're not.
Oh. All right,
Senator Braham?
So, President, for my contribution today, sir, would be limited to congratulating Senator Samuda and Minister Chang in getting this bill in Parliament and to have it to be approved in the Senate today. Because this has been a long-standing matter, especially since we have had cell phones in Jamaica. And indeed, we know the administrations that have been in place and what has happened. I think it's a significant achievement. And indeed, I see the security infrastructure that are rolling out in terms of legislation, Mr. President, and the likely crippling effect that these will have activity. And to the extent that there are criminal activities in the prison itself, to curtail and, if possible, eliminate them, Mr. President. I think it is highly beneficial, and we are grateful for the ministry staff and the leadership of the ministry. This is an excellent movement, and I think the people of Jamaica is grateful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Braham. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank colleagues who contributed to the debate. The cut and thrust of politics sometimes, we take strong positions on both sides. And I think when we're all fighting for that Jamaican dream, the same targets that we have, but we see things very differently in some cases in terms of how you get there. The debates can get heated. I don't think, well, let me just put it bluntly. I don't have the view that my colleagues in the opposition are unsupportive of the crime fight. I do have the view that which I've stated and shared privately and publicly, that the view on matters like the SOE is misguided and unfortunate. But do I have a doubt in terms of where you want the country to be and the safety you want for citizens? No. That's not a view, and certainly you want to make sure that is not the source of the debate. Let's debate fiercely the way we get there. And when we need to come together, hopefully we do. And it's good that on this well, now afternoon, we do come together on this one. Just because I mentioned SOE and I crave the indulgence of President and members on that side, it was brought to my attention out of the last SOE debate, I believe, by Ms. Cohen, and I didn't do it in my closing at the time. The JDF Joint Select Committee had actually met, but I wasn't able to find the evidence, so I've gotten the copy of the documents, and perhaps it's useful to share with members on both sides. I'd mentioned in the closing on the SOE space that I couldn't find the evidence of the JDF, the amendment to the Defense Force Act that Joint Select Committee had met, because I wasn't able to find it in the library, but it's brought to my attention that it was. So just for completeness of records, just to acknowledge that it did indeed meet, and I'd encourage, I know I'm reviewing, I'd encourage members to also review, because I think it forms the basis of discussion on safety and security issues for Jamaica. To the substantive matter before us, President, I am happy that colleagues have indicated their intention to support. Just to note that a deliberate decision was taken to deal with this amendment before the full repeal and replace of the Corrections Act because of the seriousness of the issue itself. As I have said publicly before, and we've been clear on, the offender management policy is certainly expected to be complete, tabled for discussion first part of the year. That will form the basis of the drafting instructions that you'll need to do the full repeal and replace. So I think that gives room for us, having tested this with operationalizing it, to see where it works, where it doesn't work, and to make further amendments then. I've learned how long legislation takes and what the process of review is, but we didn't pause the teams that were working on that new bill and on that policy space. We walked and chewed gum at the same time, right? So that work is ongoing, and we do target that in another 12 to 18 months to have that full new bill there, but we couldn't wait 12 to 18 months to address this issue. The topic of corrections, Mr. President, is always fraught and deeply centered in the debate between what is the appropriate level of custodial management and investment in that space versus what is the appropriate level of investment in your rehabilitation space. And invariably, because we all know that the recidivism rate is high in Jamaica, we've spent a lot of time in our discussion, certainly in my time in the chamber, focused on the efforts of rehabilitation. And it's very important. But I think this sends a signal that we see as equally important the need to have strong custodial management to ensure that those who have been separated from society by a correctional order are indeed separated in a manner that is in line with modern standards and that provides safety and security for their victims and for the communities that they have preyed on in some cases while our rehabilitation efforts work. I think Senator Fraser-Binns, a point to note is that the legislation, depending on the contemplation, looks between 3 and 20 years at different extremes in terms of the aggravating factors. But important to note that at the lower end, it virtually doubles the average sentence in Jamaica. So it's 5, 20, 50. I mean, you want the strongest signal to be sent, you want the strong sentences. I think we start here, and as you say, in 18 months, we look at what the impact it is having within the facilities and within the communities, and we have a frank conversation as to whether we need to go in a stronger, with stronger sentences at that point. But at least the amendment and the technical work would have been done on these clauses, so it would be changing 3 to 5 or 5 to 7, if that is the prevailing view of our countrymen on both sides of the aisle. I did mention that the offender management policy is being focused on. It's critically important. The new act has to come, and a full overhaul of corrections has to come on the back of it. A new bill without new infrastructure simply won't do it. Now, to note, Senator Brown is not just doing a little thing at Rio Cobre. We've renovated another block there to improve the quality of the space that persons are indeed held, those who are not bedridden. Just this week, and something that I'm particularly proud of, though I would have given the statement, I believe, last week, time getting blurry. Rio Cobre, just this Thursday, we would have officially opened a new dormitory that would have taken the boys out of Hilltop from a situation that really wasn't appropriate and put them into new modern facilities at Rio Cobre. This week, we would have officially opened the new staff quarters at Rio Cobre to ensure that the staff also have appropriate facilities for themselves. And perhaps most important, not the one that's going to make the most news, but the most important for the rehabilitation discussion, is the new classroom block, which was also officially opened before for the boys of Rio Cobre. So that facility is not where I yet want it to be, but is a far cry from where I found it. We move on to Metcalf Street just this week. A full assessment was done for a new project for other training areas, including woodwork, and indeed looked at the library to see how you get the boys in that space encouraged to and turned on to learning. And a very important step through a public-private partnership of sorts, we opened a music room and music studio in partnership with Jeffrey Campbell, Agent Sasko, as known to many, and Digicel Foundation, to try and get the boys into learning through music. And I also wish to put on record, Mr. President, in the Parliament, our thanks to Mr. Campbell and indeed the Digicel Foundation for partnering with us on such an important initiative. But beyond that, Mr. President, the discussion of infrastructure on DCS, I think, is in many ways in the public domain in terms of how people analyze it, has been pedestrian over the years. You have, previous to the closure of the Hilltop facility, you had 11 facilities. And there's very good reasons, including some of the international treaties that you've signed on, to why certain persons can't be held in the same facilities. Remandees aren't held with convicts, males aren't held with females. So you do need, and there are also varying risk levels in terms of the inmates and how you hold them. So there are a number of factors. Now, in every report, and I've said it in all the media reports, in the Indicom reports, infrastructure comes up. But in many ways, persons with an untrained eye looking on saying, you need infrastructure. And I think it's impatient a debate that you do. But the step that we've taken, Mr. President, is that we have commenced the process of a full engineering assessment of all of our facilities, as I would have said in my State of the Nation, to ensure that the planned expenditure is programmed in a manner that gives the Ministry of Finance accurate information as to exactly what is required, so that we can determine which buildings and facilities are indeed fit for renovation, which buildings in facilities are indeed fit for replacement, and which ones have to go. Now, I have no objection to the fact that prime real estate, such as the land that is occupied by the General Penitentiary, should not be a prison. That's impatient to debate. The process by which we are engaged in to ensure that that land gives the country maximum value and contributes to a new prison is underway. I'm not going to go into that much today because in short order there will be fair announcements. But I hope also not inappropriate, Senator Brown. I will bet you that in your lifetime you will at minimum see ground broken on a new prison. And admittedly, it will not have been paid for by our former colonial masters. And that's a point that I think we shouldn't forget. I have never disagreed that a new prison is long past. We shouldn't have needed one when I was born. And 37 years later, we do need one. So it is not a point of pride, and shouldn't be for anyone in this house, that at any stage over the last 30 years we still didn't have one. I don't believe the offer was appropriate. I don't believe it was the right offer. I believe the approach that we're taking now is the appropriate approach, Mr. President and colleagues, and is one that will ensure the expenditure is programmed that there is ample communication and consultation, and that it is fit for purpose, Mr. President, and it is done in line with international best practice. Mr. President, just to note two other points in closing. The Intercept Act is clearly taken into consideration in this legislation, and as well as the Fingerprints Act, as we said, it has received a consequential amendment to ensure that all of the thinking process and all of the laws available to us to deal with this scourge are looped in properly, and I believe the framework is the right framework. But we do have the luxury of reviewing in 12 to 18 months, I believe, because the new act will take into consideration these provisions. So it will be worth us noting at that point, and then if, you know, another look needs to be taken, we'll take a look at that point. Final comment. Just to note, the issue, which is a ticklish political one, US and UK deportations, there have been steady declines in recent months of the number of persons being deported, and there are a lot of conversations happening about how it happens and how it proceeds. And just to make the public know that we don't take the issue lightly, and we continue to fight and protect the rights of our citizens, whether they live here or abroad. Last point in closing, Mr. President, before I commend it to the vote, is just that this legislation doesn't close the discussion that has to be had, which is being had on the same issue in police lockups. That will come shortly. But we're looking at this, we dealt with this first because we were already midway in this process in looking at the repeal and replacement of the Act. That will also come to ensure that we close the loop in all of our spaces and provide appropriate consequences to those in our custody. Mr. President, that concludes the debate. I ask that the bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Samuda, and thank you, Senator Gale. Thank you. Ministers, ask that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corrections Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause.
Mr. President, I don't detect any unwillingness to put all clauses at the same time. I don't see any issue. And colleagues have said no objection.
That, of course, rests with that purview, of course, rests with the President.
Absolutely, Mr. President.
Or the chairman of the committee.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Just giving some encouragement.
Senator Samuda, there are no amendments that it is proposed to take here.
No, Mr. President, no amendments.
But the clerk is rightly pointing out that the amendments from the House were incorporated into this document, okay?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So I will do it as follows. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? I put clauses 2 to 4. Those in favor? Against? I put clauses 4 to 9. Those in favor? Against? I put clauses 9 to 13. To 13. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Mr. President, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
Question put. Those in favor? Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corrections Act, read a third time and passed.
Senator Hill? So, I'm sorry, Senator Samuda?
Mr. President, it is now intended to take the motion of which I gave notice of earlier related to the MOCA regulations. Mr. President, the matter for consideration of the Senate is the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency Investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulations 2021. This is the second set of regulations brought before the Senate for affirmative resolution. In March 2020, the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency Code of Conduct and Disciplinary Procedure Regulations 2020 were passed in this very House. The resolution tabling these regulations was brought to the House of Representatives and affirmed on December 7th and is now being brought before you in the Senate for consideration. Mr. President, by way of reminder, MOCA was established by virtue of the MOCA Act 2018, which was entered into force on April 1, 2018. MOCA carries out critical functions aimed at combating serious crime, Mr. President. Pursuant to Section 6 of the Act, the agency is primarily mandated to effectively tackle major organized crime, economic crime, cybercrime, and corruption. The Minister of National Security, in presenting the regulation in the House of Representatives, highlighted some crucial stats relating to the work MOCA has done since its establishment. I do not propose to repeat them here for the Senate, but I must highlight for the benefit of those watching the role of the agency in securing conviction of 3 former employees of the Manchester Parish Council. 5 of the 7 individuals who were charged with conspiracy to defraud the Manchester Parish Council of $400 million over a 3-year period were convicted in May 2020. These individuals were involved in one of the biggest fraud cases at a municipal authority in Jamaica. Important to note should also be the number of cases currently before the court has brought by the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency, over 80 currently before the court. We can all appreciate that the investigation of fraud and corruption cases can take a while, but the result will be of significant impact to the safety and security of society. For this reason, we need to ensure that the legislative framework is available to support the work of the agency. Mr. President, these regulations were developed to have formal investigative protocols written to both enhance and preserve the investigative process. As Leader of the Opposition, Mark Golden, noted in the debate in the lower house, it is recognized that the regulations being presented are prescriptive as it relates to how officers of MOCA should operate. Mr. President, this was deliberate, as MOCA officers do not have general policing powers. As such, they cannot operate as under common law. It is therefore necessary to ensure that the procedures outlining how they operate are clearly set out. Mr. President, whilst the regulations were generally guided by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984 PACE codes of practice in the United Kingdom, which has the application to all enforcement in that country, these regulations are intended as a first step to raise the standard of conduct of law enforcement when investigating matters. These regulations are an indication of the direction that all modern law enforcement must take and can be used as a model going forward. Mr. President, the regulations are set out in 5 parts. Part 1 outlines the title of the regulations, interpretation of terms, as well as the objects of the regulations. The objects as outlined in Regulation 3 are as follows: to provide for the proper administration of the functions of the agency pursuant to Section 6, 1D and E of the Act, by outlining the practices and procedures to be followed by an officer in executing powers of arrest, search, and seizure in relation to serious crimes. the detention, treatment, and questioning of persons in the conducting of investigations relating to serious crimes and the prosecution of serious crimes, so as to ensure that the procedures and guidelines relating thereto are balanced by safeguards to protect the rights of an individual who is detained, questioned, searched, or arrested pursuant to the provisions of these regulations. Regulation 4 empowers the Director General to establish a use of force policy outlining the circumstances in which reasonable force may be used by an officer. The regulations stipulate that all MOCA officers must be bound by these guidelines in exercising their power. Part 2, Mr. President, deals with the powers of arrest with or without warrant, which are expected to be conducted in accordance with the 7th schedule of the Principal Act. In such instances where a MOCA officer carries out an arrest without a warrant, Regulation 6.1 stipulates that this arrest is made in accordance with paragraph 1 of the 7th schedule of the Act, which states an officer of the agency may arrest without a warrant any person found committing or whom he has reasonable cause to suspect is about to commit a serious crime. For the purpose of making an arrest without a warrant, based on reasonable cause, Regulation 6.3 requires that the determination of reasonable cause is based on any fact of information known to the officer, which are relevant to the likelihood that a serious crime is about to be committed or has been committed, as the circumstances may require. It is important to note, colleagues, that the regulations provide for an officer arresting a person shall inform the arrested person of the arrest and the relevant circumstances of the arrest, outlined at Regulation 7. Outlined at Regulation 7 is the information to be provided to the arrested person at the time of arrest, including the caution to be administered. Permeating through these regulations is a careful attention to abiding by the constitutional protections provided to every person in Jamaica. Regulation 8, Mr. President, provides for the record of information to be kept by an officer who makes an arrest. Part 3, Mr. President, the powers of search and seizure are provided for extensively under Regulation 10 through 20, which outline the procedures to be followed by an officer. Regulation 11 requires an officer and any authorized person to identify themselves and to provide information to the persons being searched or to the owner of the property or premises or specified equipment being searched. Such information must include other pertinent records, such as the authority under which the person is being detained for conducting the search and the purpose and objective of the search. Regulation 11.2 requires that the officer in charge seeks permission from the owner or person in charge for access to the premises or specified equipment. Regulation 11.3, however, provides for an exemption in instances where, for example, the premises is unoccupied, or the owner or person in charge of the premises or specified equipment is not present at the date and time when the search is being conducted. Regulations 12, 13, 14, and 15 outline procedures to be followed, Mr. President, in the case of application to obtain a search warrant. In such instances, the officer shall take reasonable steps to ensure that the information is accurate. Of importance, an application for a search warrant shall specify the grounds for the making of the application, including the object of the search and whether the purpose is to find evidence is relevant to an investigation into an act involving a serious crime. Mr. President, another key element of Part 3 of the regulations is Regulation 16, requiring a MOCA officer to allow the owner or person in charge of his agent to observe all stages of the search being conducted by the officer. This provision is relevant during the conduct of the search and is very important in safeguarding the integrity of the investigations being carried out. It is important to note here of the circumstances under which this provision shall not apply, as outlined at Regulation 16.2, which are A, where the premises or specified equipment are unoccupied, and B, where there are reasonable grounds for believing that the presence of the owner or person in charge of the premises or specified equipment would frustrate the objectives of conducting the search or endanger the officers or authorized person conducting the search. Regulation 18 provides for the use of reasonable force in accordance with the use of force policy guidelines and duty of officer when force is used to enter premises or specified equipment in execution of a search warrant. Once satisfied by the officer, use of reasonable force may be necessary in instances of refusal of the request for access, where communication with the owner or person is in charge is impossible, and under any other circumstances specified under Regulation 11.3. Regulation 20 provides for the record of the search and stipulates that where an officer conducts a search of any person, premises, or specified equipment, the officer shall at the time of the search make a record of the search, and such record shall be captured in writing. Part 4 of the regulations outlines the practices and procedures to be adopted by an officer relating to the detention, treatment, and questioning of persons. Mr. President, one of the key provisions addresses the treatment of a detained person, which is important in acknowledging the rights of all persons to be treated fairly whilst in the custody of law enforcement, of the law enforcement agency. Regulation 22 stipulates that a detained person shall be dealt with expeditiously and released as soon as it is reasonably determined that there is no need for continued detention. This would extend the latitude of the agency. This would extend the latitude the agency requires to fully investigate and determine whether a need for detention exists. And in addition, the regulation provides for special treatment of persons where there are language barriers and or disability challenges. For example, a person who is detained appears to be with a disability, then they should be afforded the necessary assistance as required under the Disabilities Act. Regulation 23 speaks to the notification of rights for persons who are arrested for a serious crime. Regulation 24 through 29 outline in detail the treatment of persons who voluntarily attend a police station, agency, or other location to be interviewed. Regulation 30 sets out the right to legal representation upon detention, wherein a person who is detained by the agency shall be informed of his right to legal representation and to consult and communicate privately with an attorney at law. Mr. President, the right to legal representation is set out in the Constitution. Regulations 31 and 32 set out terms under which a caution is indeed given. Regulations 33 to 39, Mr. President, set out how and where interviews are to be conducted, rules in relation to conducting interviews, and recording of the interview. Part 5 of the regulations, Mr. President, and particularly Regulation 40, addresses duty of a prosecuting officer to review, advise on, and to prosecute offenses relating to serious crimes. It is to be noted, Mr. President, that in conducting criminal prosecutions, that officers are expected to carry out their functions consistent with any prosecutorial code of practice established by the Director of Public Prosecutions in accordance with Regulation 43. Regulation 41 stipulates that the prosecuting officer is fair, objective, and impartial in carrying out his prosecutorial duties, and is therefore prohibited from allowing his personal views about ethnic or national origin, gender, disability, age, religion or belief, sexual orientation, or gender identity of the suspect, defendant, victim, or any witnesses to influence his decision. Mr. President, in concluding, this is another important piece of legislation. MOCA is indeed fully functional, but it is important that we complete the arrangements for institutionalizing this agency. I acknowledge conceptually the work that would have been put in by the previous administration under then Minister of National Security, now Senator Bunting. But I also acknowledge the work that has been done by the teams at the MNS, by the teams at MOCA in bringing us this far. This country will be safer and more secure because of their work. I thank the men and women there who are also indeed patriots for the work they have done so far. and we continue to give them the tools that they require to ensure that we get the results that we all indeed want. I put it to colleagues and invite contributions to the debate on the regulations and remind colleagues that though we can take comments, we can't amend the regulations. Thank you.
Samuda. Senator President, I want to thank Senator Samuda for the way he has led off. I can't say I'll thank you for the way he closed the debate and the resolution. But read the regulations. But what can be said is that this is the last sitting before the holidays, the Christmas holiday, a time of peace and comfort. And it is very comforting and refreshing when you lead the debate on behalf of the government. And I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for your leadership. And I can assure the country that our response will take the cue from your tone. As I say, I can't say how you finish. President, the MOCA had its origin in decision taken in the last Portia Simpson Miller administration. And you, Minister Samuel, rightly point to the continuity, the need for additional work to be done to tackle serious crimes in the country. And I'm a little disappointed that it has taken so long. And maybe I'm being nice when I say a little. I'm bigly disappointed, if I may borrow President Trump's term, that has taken so long for the regulations, re-investigation and prosecution procedures. Now, I know they have been working. And we want to commend them and urge them with the passage of these regulations to redouble their efforts. And why they have to redouble their efforts? In the past, Minister Samuda would describe the issue of prejudice, for example, as not a simple thing, but not a major issues. I've sat in the Senate with Norman Grant from JS, and he constantly spoke about the need to bring prejudice under control. I heard this week on the radio that MOCA, major organized crime, is now investigating the killing of those 2 goat farmers in Westmoreland. And my condolences go on behalf of the opposition, goes to their family and their friends. When prejudice become a major crime, we know we're losing the battle. And I pray that MOCA will help us recover against the criminals, not just in the area of prejudice, but in all serious crimes. Minister, I concede that this government has spent a lot of money, billions, is it 40 odd, 50 odd billions fighting crime, or in crime fighting? What I've learned is not how much you spend. Because if we're spending, we could choose to go to Moon Palace rather than Cardiff, which is owned by our trust. It is the effectiveness of the spend that we must measure. And using this statistics from the police, Minister Samuda, up to Saturday gone, there's 1,384 murders in the country. Up to Saturday, the 11th. 1,384 murders. Minister, that was 127 more lives lost year to date relative to last year. That's a 10% more murders over last year. So if we should look at the tenure of this government, just for this year alone, notwithstanding the billions spent, we're going in the wrong direction in respect to crime, which means more work for the hard-working men of MOCA and the underpaid and demoralized men and women of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. And by the way, let me say it. I hope it's not unparliamentary. I support their cry for increased wages. And I believe the commissioner support it. I believe the minister said they support it. But we need more than talk. We need them to walk the walk and sign the checks. The police deserves more, and their overtime issue needs to be resolved. But this 1,384 murders up to last week, without the year being completed, is more than any of the 4 years that the leader of the opposition business and the Senate presided over when he was Minister of National Security. You said by far, former minister, by far, because under you, the ICE was 1205 in a full year. We are now 1,384, which means, Minister Samuda and members of the Senate, to you, Mr. President, is that on average, each day, 4 Jamaicans are murdered. On average, each day, 4 Jamaicans are murdered. This is a government that promised that we could sleep with our doors and windows open and wake up in the morning and still be alive. But I figure if I wake up, you'll be alive. But they wanted the effect. So the then opposition leaders said to us, when you wake up in the morning, you will still be alive. Your windows and doors can remain open. We're told that's an aspiration. But it's an aspiration which we're not aiming to achieve when we're killing 4 per day. Murders 4 per day. The bulk of it by the gun. Minister, we need MOCA because of those 1,384 killings, over 60% have not seen an arrest. In other words, 60% plus haven't been cleared up. 60% plus have not been cleared up. And clear up include a simple arrest. If you arrest somebody, that's clear up. So, if Senator Webby was here, I would say to Senator Webby, in a corporate boardroom, looking at this performance this year, 1,384 murders up to Saturday, 10% in the wrong direction over last year. How would you rate the manager of that plant? Would you keep the manager of that plant? Would you demand greater performance from the manager of that plant? Because you can't tell me that that performance comes because we spend billions. Because again, the mistake we make, Minister Samuda, is to think that by spending the money, we get the results. And I hope MOCA, in their operation, will spend wisely and continue to give us good results. I too am happy that the crooks at the Manchester Municipal Council have been caught. And I'm looking forward to the crooks in other places. Some now before the courts, being convicted. It's a long time I haven't seen a Probin Akins and a J.G. Smith spending time as guests of Her Majesty. Spending time as guests of Her Majesty. This country celebrates any day a politician goes to spend time with Her Majesty, since we no longer swear to uphold her. But Senator Samuda, it doesn't matter to me whether the cat that catches a rat is black or white. Doesn't matter to me whether the person who sponsored the prison pathway is a former colonial master or not. I want a secure prison. So it doesn't matter to me the color of the cat. Just as it doesn't matter the color of the cat when it comes to accepting to become a privy councillor. It's fine to become a privy councillor, but it's not fine to take money to build a prison. You know what I prefer? That we take the privy councillorship and give it a scholarship for our students. And so, I would love to see the experience that MOCA has gathered, the talent they have, being shared also with the Jamaica Constabulary Force. So we can get the guns, crush the gangs, and cut the murder rate. Senator Samula, you and I, and all of us in this chamber, would love to see a reduction in the murder rates. So we are not opposing to this MOCA. We are supporting regulation. We're supporting it. We complain it's a little late, but we're supporting it. Can we together look forward to working across the aisles more on the issue of fight against crime? The fight against crime doesn't come through SOEs only. SOEs may or may not be part of it where necessary. I saw recently, Mr. President, in Louisiana, the security force there went and took out 351 criminals, including gang leaders. When we pass the anti-gang legislation, it's to help you to take out of the society these gang members. We passed the anti-gang legislation, piloted by Bunting here and Golden in the Senate. Bunting in the House and Golden in the Senate. We passed those because we want to fight crime. So what struck me about what they did in Louisiana, which had cooperation, and I see my friend Ronnie writing, so I know I'm going to speak. What they did, I know you like writing, my friend. What they did was their success came from being data-driven. Being data-driven. I asked anybody, I asked a friend I was traveling with yesterday, on the road on which you live in an inner city community, can you tell who is the bad man? And them say, yes, yes, yes. I would expect a serious police force, anti-crime organization would target, would identify and target these criminals. We have a sense of who have the gun in which lane and Walton Park. What do you know? Senator Abraham. And we can develop that database which allows us to know when they go to the bathroom, to allow us to know when they trail in a car to shoot it up at some gas station. I have faith in the MOCA people. I hope that we will see success. But we can't measure success unless we know from where we're coming. I use this year figures because Senator Samuda is going to come and close and tell me about some year when murder went to 16 something for the year. I want to focus on what your government is doing for us lately. What your government is doing. And I can't focus any better than this year figures because you totally responsible for it. When I say responsible for it, you are responsible for getting it down. But it's going in the other direction. The answer to it is not to death penalty. Because the truth be told, Senator Braham, the Privy Council, which that side, when they had a chance to get rid of, chose not to. Because there was a bill to bring in the Caribbean Court of Justice. The Privy Council have said, you can only hang the worst of the worst. And it appeared to me, President, that under the Privy Council view, you will never get to the worst of the worst, no matter how heinous the crime is. Because that came, Senator Allen, from a decision in, I think, a St. Vincent case. Trimmingsworth? Yeah, man cut out the lady's neck at the bus stop. He went to the Privy Council and they say, you can't hang her. So this notion that if I had my way, when MOCA hold these gunmen, I would start with the death penalty. I wonder where you would end. The death penalty is not an option open to us. But what is open to us is effective investigation and prosecution. And I believe the regulations help us in that direction. Help us in that direction. I'm looking forward to something that we never achieved, Senator Bunting. But the setting of targets to say we hope by year 2, the murder rate will be down. We hope that rape, which is running at 1 a day, would be none a day. That shooting would be down. And the way we do this is to learn from others. That Louisiana movement that in a couple of months took down 351 criminals. Working together is achievable. We can do it. We hope MOCA will help us. We hope a motivated Jamaica constabulary force will help us to do it. There was a time, as I close, Mr. President, when a minister said that whoever comes as commissioner, man, boy, or child, must come with a plan. Well, if this commissioner came with a plan, it has failed. If this commissioner came with a plan, it has failed because murder is going in the wrong direction. And Senator Samuda, why I choose murder? Because it's final. You broke in a man's house, him can recover. To tell me that, and even accusatory crimes are too high. Don't go there. Let's focus on the lives. 127 more lives up to start the last year. 1,384 murders. Let's focus on that. And in that, the government has failed. You have our help and our support in fighting crime. We will support this regulation. We said to you, we can do more. We can do more. We can do better. We can do better. We should do better. Let us go on the basis of a data-driven approach. We know who the criminals are, Peter. We know who the criminals are. We target them. We take them out and put them before the court. We know what to do. Let us do it. Mr. President, the leader of opposition business has delegated me to speak first on the bill and on this one. I don't know if I'm going to speak on another matter, although it falls under my portfolio. But maybe it's a good time to wish all of us, the staff, the security force, yourself, my colleagues, those present and those absent, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. It's Christmas time. Let's live good with each other. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown.
Mr. President.
Senator Brown. Why you laugh?
Thank you, President. Thank you. I haven't heard that pronunciation in a while. But my friend, Senator Brown, started off, I think, with several half-truths. The first one, and this part of it is true, that Senator Samuda is a good senator, and that he leads bills and other matters well when he's leading. The unsaid half-truth and innuendo being cast by Senator Brown is that the Senate leader of this side is not the same. And that I'm trying to be parliamentary. It's very unfortunate, that line that Senator Brown has been carrying, because certainly Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith is a leader of this side. And indeed, she has the support of the members of this side, and that there's nothing that is done that is not agreed, and she's a part to it. No, I think it is important. I'm not asked to do it, but I think it is important because you keep spending time on this matter, and I think somebody should say something about it. It is not correct. It is not correct. And if you can talk about it, I should be able to talk about it. Caught any way you want to catch. It is wrong. The leader of government business has led her and can perform her role exemplarily. We and I are well pleased in the leader of government business. She is no obstacle to cooperation, Mr. President, and to suggest otherwise is unfair, untrue, and political. So I would suggest to Senator Brown to desist from that particular untruth. It's a bit of propaganda, Senator. All right. Having said that, I think you have to be careful how you speak. To celebrate the idea that politicians will be going to prison. It's a terrible thing. Persons who are guilty of offenses, that's fine, you go to prison, and if that is the case. But the way it is put, Mr. President, politicians are not at this time in the society particularly fondly regarded, and for us to be making a public spectacle persons who have not been convicted or otherwise, and celebrating as if they are going to prison, is a thing that should bring sadness to our hearts, not jollification. I don't think it's a time for jollification. And indeed, since I've been in the Senate, no politician, no member of parliament, no senator, no minister has gone to prison. And indeed, yes, let it be straw, but are still knocking him down. And indeed, those before have not gone to prison. I don't know what people did before haven't been done. I'm not casting any aspersions. But if that should happen, it will be a very sad day for us and our country. And I'm not looking forward to it. The third one that I want to mention, Mr. President, is a suggestion almost that to spend money, Mr. President, on the security infrastructure, to suggest by innuendo that is a waste of time. That is false, Mr. President.
1 minute, Senator. 1 minute, Senator Braham.
I made no such statement. And
no, but
the member says
Brown,
I am speaking half truth.
Senator Brown,
well,
no, Senator Brown, hold on now. Yeah. What he said is that there was an innuendo.
Yeah, but not even what I said could have drawn.
Okay. No. Senator Braham used the word innuendo.
Yeah, all right. If he wishes to go, if he wishes to go 100% on truth, that's fine with me.
All right, no problem. Senator Braham, continue, please.
Yes. You see, Mr. President, Senator Brown and the other members, all those who are squealing loudly, are continuously make the point that there is a continuum. And the government of Jamaica has found itself in a position, first of all, that it had to spend money on our security infrastructure because it inherited need situations that had to be dealt with. Now, that to me is a matter for congratulation, not derision, Mr. President, that these funds were spent on, and we can see the tangible benefits of it. We can see the improved police stations. We can see the improved police operations and security apparatus, Mr. President. It can't be right every time somebody gets up to speak to suggest that those matters, and I am saying that is an innuendo. If you don't agree with it, so be it. To me, it is, and it is wrong. I am not denying that murder rate needs to go down, but you cannot suggest, with the other hand, that the spending is almost a waste of time. That's what I'm complaining about.
Point of order, Mr. President. I rarely do this to...
Thank you, Senator Braham.
I rarely do this to Senator Braham, but I think the road that he's going down is going to require us to get a copy of Hansard, because he is attributing to Senator Brown certain things which, to my certain knowledge, Senator Brown did not say.
Okay,
and
so
I
what?
Think, just a minute.
No. If you have a point of order, Senator, then you make it. What you are suggesting? Hold on, 1 minute. What you are suggesting is that Senator Brown did not make the comments that what is being attributed to.
Correct, sir.
But right, that's not a problem. So Senator Brown can get the Hansard and bring it to our attention in due course, but the member is going to continue his presentation.
Mr. President, if I may though, and I completely accept your ruling, but if I may though, you see the challenge is that if Senator Braham continues down that road, we have to consider whether or not that which is said is going to have such a negative effect that even after the Hansard, it can't be repaired.
Okay,
and
so hold on a minute. Listen to what I'm going to say. If I believe that Senator Braham says something so egregious, then I will stop him. But I'm not going to do that because, to my mind, he is referring to a statement made by Senator Brown about expenditure, which is on the, but it's not, it's on the, in other words, look here. Here what my ruling is. If Senator Brown has an issue, he can get the Hansard and make the correction. But I'm not going to interrupt the speaker again.
You know, Mr. President, the decision, if I may, Senator Brown, the decision rests with you as the arbiter of the national interest in here. And so I said the decision rests with you as the arbiter. But I would also like to state on the record that in light of what Senator Braham is trying to do, I believe that no good can come of it. And I am asking you kindly, sir, to at minimum, if you could let us ask the Hansard team to see what was said by Senator Braham. We have done it before. Senator Brown, we have done it before.
To stop the debate in the middle of this to find out what they said?
No, I'm asking you, Mr. President.
No,
Mr.
Senator
President,
Brown
I'm
can make
you
that
what
application.
I'm asking you, ask a question. And
Senator Brown can make that application.
Mr. President, you have asked a question and I wish to answer you. I'm not asking you to stop the debate. I'm asking you, sir, in light of the concern that has been raised, for two things.
What I'm telling you is that I'm not recognizing the concern, you know.
Very well, Mr.
So what
President.
I'm saying, if Senator Brown has an issue, then there is a recourse and can request it.
Well, indeed, Mr. President, you are the president and your decision has been made.
Not in the least.
Senator Brown, I'm well aware of that. Continue, please, Senator Brown.
My position is very clear. I am saying to the Senate that to do the juxtapositions that Senator Brown does leaves an improper impression. It is very clear. I'm saying it amounts to an innuendo and that people are not fools. They understand. And I'm saying it is not correct. And that's all I'm saying. And I'm trying to put it as clear as possible that that is what I mean. And you must bear in mind that this spending is necessary, Mr. President. It's a necessary spending. So you cannot say that because the murder rate go up, and suggest that the spending, and that's my understanding of what you're saying, and I'm putting it as I think. Oh, you know. So, and I think a lot of people understand it the way I do. And if that is the case, then I have a right to address it. I mean, Mr. President, that is how I see it. So there it is. Mr. President, that MOCA, one of the aspects of their interests is financial crimes, Mr. President. And that is not limited to corruption, although that forms a part of it. But financial crimes in the country, Mr. President, are prosecuted daily, but unfortunately, having regard to other important issues, these are not necessarily, when you go to court, a priority within the court system. And so, sometimes they take a back seat, and oftentimes they take very long to be prosecuted. And when they take long to be prosecuted, sometimes, Mr. President, it loses momentum, and sometimes those who should be convicted go free. And therefore, Mr. President, I did hear the Minister of Justice, Honorable Delroy Chuck, mentioning the importance of speeding up that area of trials, Mr. President, and we cannot lose sight of the financial crime aspect, Mr. President. And that ties in very well with the notes that are required and the expansion of the note-taking capacity in the court system in Jamaica, Mr. President. I look forward to the continued improvement and to the days that will come that it will be almost near real time for the production of these notes, and that whether or not there's a special financial crimes part of the system of the courts or otherwise, that those areas will be taken with the same level of attention as some of the more bodily offenses that happen, Mr. President. I think that the MOCA regulations will go a far way in assisting in that area and in supporting the continuous effort to improve our security situation. And I want to sit by, and when I sit, I'm not saying, Mr. President, that 1,000 murders or more a year is a good thing. I'm not saying that. It is not. And certainly, if under your watch you're having more than 1,000 yourself, or 1,000, that too is not a good thing. We have somewhere to go, but I believe that all of this effort will indeed bear good fruit, and I look forward to that day, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bram. You want it?
No.
Okay. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. The identification of the need for an agency like MOCA came out of the work that was done in producing a national security policy, which was published eventually in 2013, but was worked on primarily in 2012. And it was clear that the GSF, and particularly the criminal investigators, the detectives, were overwhelmed by the volume of just the sheer number of violent crimes that they had to investigate. And that they would always need to give priority to the violent crimes. And the ratio of cases to prosecutors was so much higher than in most countries in the world. But at the same time, it was recognized that corruption and those involved in organized crime, but who might never be the one pulling the trigger or wielding whatever implement that created harm, knife, etc., that they and their facilitators, which might include professionals, bankers, accountants, lawyers, in many ways had a much more corrosive effect on the governance structures of the state. And so we started with a joint force team. That was the first inception of MOCA. You had members from the GSF, from the JDF, and sort of we got support from our international partners for some consultants. We spent a lot of time studying the National Crime Agency, the FBI, other sort of law enforcement agencies that focused on the organized criminal, including the white-collar criminals, and eventually came up with a model for MOCA. Importantly, we incorporated in the second phase the anti-corruption branch of the GSF, which then operated as a quite discrete unit within the GSF. It recruited directly from Twickenham Park and tried to retain its own culture, highly vetted officers, etc. And they were incorporated in phase 2 as a permanent part of MOCA. I welcome the fact that this administration has continued the work and in institutionalizing MOCA in statute and in regulations, which was always the plan from day one. But to get it started and kicked off, we just did it administratively initially. And now we've come to these regulations, which are an important first step in addressing, well, not first, but an important step in addressing these issues. The prosecutorial element, of course, in these regulations is relatively brief, as the DPP's office in 2012, I believe it was, issued a prosecution protocol which will govern the whatever prosecutions MOCA undertake. And I believe that when it was the protocol, the protocol was issued for the office of the DPP. So it was for prosecutors generally. And then it was Crown prosecutors, because I'm not sure we had any other prosecutorial agencies then. But it is incorporated within these regulations by reference. Not just that protocol, but any updated version of that protocol. So we understand why it wouldn't have, they only briefly mentioned the prosecutorial side in the regulations. The investigation procedures, however, I think are good. The rules that govern investigation in the JCF, for example, are much more dated, and it's a mix of common law and what's in the JCF Act and the regulations and the force orders. And I think this is an improvement in the sense that it's modern, it brings it all together in one place, and it's perhaps something that some of our other agencies, law enforcement agencies, could look to adopt. Something that is not directly addressed here, which, Minister, I think you may want to, in future, look at whether by regulation, whether by MOU, is the issue of deconflicting which agency takes the lead in these types of investigations. As it is now, we see JCF investigating organized crime or major organized crime. The FID also has that within their mandate, particularly as it deals with the Proceeds of Crime Act and money laundering and related things, which often those are elements in organized crime. MOCA, of course, and even the Integrity Commission, their possibility in terms of investigating corruption and so on. So I think, not necessarily, it may not have to be in law or regulations, but at least in some sort of MOU, I think, so that just for good order, so that they're not tripping over themselves, and also for the efficient deployment of resources, that we will be clear, that the agencies themselves will be clear who will take the lead on any particular investigations. While we can't amend regulations, there are two that I think we should look at carefully, and perhaps when we're reissuing or when we're doing another set, we might want to look at. And I say that because I think these two are a bit open-ended and could raise issues of constitutionality. Regulation 17 Regulation 17, Mr. President, says an officer may retain seized property for so long as may be necessary for the purpose of any investigation in relation thereto, and where such investigation results in legal proceedings against any person for a serious crime until the legal proceedings are finally disposed of. I have no problem, of course, retaining it until the legal proceedings are finally disposed of. But where no charge arises, I think it would be useful to put some outer limit on retaining this property for the purpose of investigation. You can say if after 12 months or 24 months, whatever the case may be, if there is no charge arising from the investigation, the person's property should be returned. That property could be a motor car. That property could be computer equipment of value, and which could be becoming obsolete in the meantime. So I think it should be incumbent on the investigating agency to complete their investigation within some reasonable time and be able to, if there is no charge coming out of the investigation, then they should be obliged to return the seized property or specified equipment. Similarly, in 22(1), a person who is detained by the agency shall be informed at the time of detention, and it goes on, but the part I'm speaking to is the final part of the regulation, which says, and released as soon as it is reasonably ascertained that the need for detention no longer exists. Again, in terms of the treatment of detained persons, I believe this is too open-ended, Mr. President, and would have, similar to, I believe in most pieces of legislation, they would put a specific time frame for release of the person unless they're going to be charged. So I think these two regulations would have been improved, or these regulations would have been improved if a limit in terms of time to return seized property or specified equipment to someone if no charge arises. And similarly, when no charge arises, there should be, some outer limit being put on the time within which they should be released as soon as it is ascertained that the need for detention no longer exists. But I suspect that these matters may be taken up in court if it is not changed over time. So, Mr. President, with those few remarks, I look forward, in the interest of ensuring the proper administration of the functions of the agencies, to us supporting these regulations and having them come into effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Senator Johnson-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. The time being 1:18, might the Senate sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Thank you very much, Senator Johnson-Smith. The time being 1:20 when Senator Samuda takes his seat, just about. The question is that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day. Those in favor? Against? Minister, anybody else? No. Minister Samuda?
Mr. President, the tools needed for law enforcement are multifaceted. They're legislative, regulatory. They include resources, whether human resources or infrastructure resources, technology, science, and of course at perhaps the most important level, the coordination between all of the factors. The regulations before us are another step in the institution building process of MOCA. MOCA is not a panacea. The Corrections Act amendment won't be a panacea. The use of SOEs won't be a panacea. There are no silver bullets when you consider the complexity of the issues that we face as a developing nation, as a small island developing state whose geographic position creates significant benefit but also creates significant risk to us as a people. This institution building process, though, Mr. President, is another step that we believe is of critical importance. It's of critical importance not just because it sends a signal to the public that we are serious about building the infrastructure, building the framework, building the legislative environment for our security forces, but it also sends a signal to those who would want to do Jamaicans harm that we're not going to do the job of building the security architecture in a piecemeal manner. We're going to carry it to completion. These regs, Mr. President, are another step in the right direction for MOCA. I believe there is one final set of regulations to come after this, which deals with some employment issues, and the final discussions with Ministry of Finance are nearing completion. That doesn't affect the functioning of the agency, no, but it's also not a matter that we will leave hanging for too long so it becomes untidy. It is nearing completion, and we hope to bring that early in the new year, which would complete the legislative arrangements for MOCA. To the point raised, Senator Bunting, the feeling and the prevailing view has been that the interrelationship between the agencies can be largely managed through MOUs. I would have noted one in the media this morning with one being signed with FID and the IC. I've noted that there are several that have been signed and are to be signed with, from RPD straight through to IC and FID, JCF, with MOCA, that will allow the agencies to function in a cohesive manner. But we also have to note, and we have to continue to review our arrangements, and we'll test the MOUs and where there needs to be tweaking. You could see a situation where one day you need legislation that comes down, that structures your architecture in a particular way. But for now, I believe the MOUs are sufficient for at least initial functioning, and then if there needs to be changes, we make changes either to the MOUs or to legislation at that point. As it relates to the treatment of detained persons, I consulted with the team, the technical team, and the feeling has been, and I'd noticed that as well, is that there's significant pieces of other legislation that would also be appropriate to refer to. So we didn't need to restate things that deal with how persons are to be held or to their constitutional rights, etc. This legislation wouldn't supersede those in terms of how you hold persons. The same rules would apply generally. That's the feeling, and I think I accept, as a non-lawyer, I accept that explanation as well. Just to note before I ask colleagues to support, I made mention that as you build the national security architecture, you have to understand that it's going to take all the factors to be complete, to bring about the sort of systems, sort of environment that you want to truly deal with the threats that you face. It is, and I've referred to it in previous debates as cognitive dissonance, to believe that the threats you face today are the same as yesterday, to believe that the threats you faced yesterday are the same as last year, to believe that with the impact of the rapid movement and growth in technology, the changing efforts of traffickers, whether of drugs, weapons, or human beings, is that they're using the same methodology. To believe that the changes in transportation and in legal arrangements with other countries have not had an impact on us. To believe that instability of some of our neighbors doesn't affect us and change the nature of the security threat. It diminishes the quality of the debate, admittedly, because the threats today just aren't the same as they were in 2016. The threats in 2016 weren't the same as they would have been in 2014, Senator Bunting. And I'm sure when you think back on the threats and the intelligence reports you'd have gotten in 2014, they just wouldn't be the same as 2012, and they certainly in 2012 wouldn't have been the same as 2010. It's a dynamic situation, and the evolution of the very weapons that we're trying to keep out is an important factor. They're discharging more rounds fast and they're smaller, making it harder to detect, causing more damage when there is a shooting incident. And that's a reality that we have not been willing to acknowledge. Now, very important point, not a panacea, but the impact of the infrastructural investments that we have made, Mr. President, is significant. I'm never going to apologize for improving the infrastructure at the rate that we have for the policemen and women of this country. It is a point that we're particularly proud of, Mr. President. It was efficient use of the money. Because you made the point of the efficiency, right? So I can respond to the efficiency. It was efficient to invest in the infrastructure that dealt with the working conditions of the men and women of the force. And this administration is proud of that investment. Just yesterday, we opened a new station in Buff Bay, which is appropriate for the environment and the changing situations and circumstances in Portland. Mr. President, for the next, I mean, we're at Christmas now, but when we open in the new year, we have several more to open, and we're going to break ground on others as well, because it's an efficient use of the nation's resources. And it is not purely salary alone that matters to how people work. I make no bones about it that though we've invested at a higher rate on issues such as mobility and surveillance and technology, we've not completed the investment program. So if you decide that what's appropriate for you is a 100,000 square foot warehouse, for instance, Senator Bunting, and people say, well, that's a heavy investment, but that's what you decide is appropriate. You can't stop the investment when you complete the walls without putting in the windows and the roof, and you can't then ask when you haven't yet finished putting on the roof why there's still leakage in a particular area. And that's where the investment discussion, I think, is falling short. We've designed a program that creates a national security architecture which is appropriate for the threats we face. We have not completed the investment program and the build-out. We have not completed the legislative work, so we can't say that it is complete and has failed. We can complain, and it is right for any opposition to determine whether or not the pace of that implementation is sufficient. It is right to say, based on this level of investment in these particular areas, what were the expected results, and to monitor it. And I'm not questioning that. But to give the impression that this was a complete structure. Our investment program, like many other areas of government expenditure globally and in all countries, has been derailed by the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, Mr. President. Now, as we've seen some amount of recovery, that program is getting back on track, and Mr. President, I have great hope and great confidence that the program will pick back up the pace that it needs to meet the threats and to pass the threats in the new year and in the coming years, Mr. President. The legislation that is to come is within our control, is not a budgetary item, and I think colleagues will see over the coming months that the pace of legislation for the national security architecture is going to pick up. There are a number of pieces which are nearing completion, which are integral tools for that toolbox. It's a terrible thing when you see a workman come to whether your house or your office to finish something, and the man has gone up, especially sometimes on a ladder, and realizes there's one tool missing and can't yet finish the job. Mr. President, we have some tools that we need to procure. We have some tools by way of legislation that we need to complete. Mr. President, this is one of those tools. We're not finished, we have more to do, but this is a step in the right direction for the national security architecture. Mr. President, just to make 2 points in closing. One is on the performance of national security. You're judged, and perhaps rightly so, on the performance of the murder rate. And it's not something that should be diminished. It is the ultimate crime to take away someone's life. But to ignore the benefits of some of your investments, some of your legislation, some of your training, and some of your policy decisions on other categories of crime also doesn't tell the fair story, and then doesn't allow you to analyze the problem that you face and to then prescribe the right solutions. Robbery, though there have been some heinous robberies in recent days, is down. Acquisitory crime is down. So you can't define something that is heading in the right direction as not. It's not appropriate to the discussion, and doesn't allow you to focus resources where you should. Not to say that the heinous robberies and the ones that are interconnected with gang activity shouldn't get attention, but they are getting appropriate attention, Mr. President, and that's something that we're not going to resile from and leave to be unsaid or unresponded to, Mr. President. You have 7 categories of major crime, Mr. President. 6 categories are down. The one that gives us greatest concern and should give us greatest concern is indeed the murder rate. Now, the murder rate increases have come from 7 police divisions. 7 police divisions that, my conscience is clear when I say this, have been living in a state of emergency for 30 years. We've not been willing as a government, because the government is made up of the administration and the opposition, to give the security forces the power that they've requested based on their best advice, based on the advice of persons who have given 30 to 40 years in service to this country on the national security front, persons who have trained in this space. You know, I would never enter a debate, certainly if I was making an investment. I would have no hesitation in calling Senator Bunting for advice on financial matters. He's done extremely well in that space. I would never have hesitation in asking any of my learned friends legal advice on whatever the case may be, because they've done that training and their experience in life has led them to that space. So I also find it unfortunate that the persons who have spent their life learning, have spent their life serving, and have spent their life making Jamaicans safer, when that advice comes, we believe we know more than them and that we're not to take it. And Mr. President, that's not a panacea either, and I said that, but it would have been an important step in holding the murder rate and bringing it down, Mr. President, and I support the measure and would have supported it if it had come for extension today. But we've always said, while that was supposed to hold and give some reprieve, we would be doing things like passing the Corrections Act, now passed. Like passing the MOCA regulations, now passed. And Mr. President, in January, February, March, April, you'll see a suite of legislative amendments, you'll see new pieces of legislation that will make our national security architecture, certainly legislative arrangements, more fit for purpose related to the threats we face. Mr. President, not a panacea, neither was the previous bill, but 2 steps in the right direction, Mr. President, that this administration is indeed proud of this afternoon, Mr. President. So with that, I ask that the motion be approved.
Thank you, Senator Samuda. The question is that the motion relating to what is referred to as the MOCA resolution piloted by Senator Samuda is approved. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, allow me to say what a pleasure it is to have a team member like Senator Samuda, who has so ably led these 2 debates this morning within the security portfolio, both being of great importance to the overall effort to stem the cycle of crime in Jamaica, that of course having being based on not only the prevention and situational concerns, but also the matter of what happens in our correctional facilities. And Senator Samuda has been doing a stellar job with that portfolio, and I really want to commend him on excellently piloting the 2 arrangements that have come before us this morning. Mr. President, the 3rd matter on the agenda for us today deals with the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. The regulations related specifically to the nomination, selection, and appointment to board regulations 2021. The regulations are brought
Minister, following consultations with the clerk, I'm going to ask you to open, and then depending on where we reach in terms of the time, we'll take 3/4 of an hour.
Okay. If everyone is minded. And I think persons, because it's a last sitting, people may have been minded to just try to finish early, but if the opposition is also minded to take a 45-minute break after opening.
fully understand and support your intention, Mr. President. However, Senator Morris will have to leave, so I would appreciate if he could be allowed to respond before he leaves.
You remember I said that.
So we have two speakers before.
I said depending on where we reach, but we can play it by ear, as they say. But I do want to give the staff a break. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And of course, we'll play it by ear. Mr. President, I must admit that in looking at these regulations and preparing for the debate today, I had a bit of a walk down memory lane on this matter of corporate governance. Because I recalled that it was, in fact, in 2012, my first motion that I brought to this House was, in fact, one in respect of the implementation of the corporate governance framework for public bodies, which had just been promulgated in 2011 before the administration changed. And my motion was for a call for the implementation. And I went back and found the motion and looked at the contents of my presentation and the amendments that were made to the motion in order for it to have bipartisan support. And the very distinct efforts made to conduct the debate in a bipartisan and non-political matter, because the issue of public management and the issue of corporate governance was one which I contended should not be politicized, because the overall public good of attaining effective and efficient management of the operations of business in government was an objective good that needed to be pursued by both sides. And I referred to the fact that both the PNP 2011 manifesto and the JLP 2011 manifesto, both of them spoke to the importance of efficiency and effectiveness in public governance. So it was an interesting walk through time. At that time, I was still on the Corporate Governance Committee of the PSOJ, where I'd sat for several years. And in that life, I was actually quite close to the process that was happening at that time. So in 2010, the PBMA and the FAA were amended as part of the fiscal responsibility framework, this a start of a process that has continued across administrations. And the development of the corporate governance framework for public bodies a critical part. At the time in my debate, in my opening presentation, I actually identified as one of the three elements that needed particular focus. Well, we looked at the composition, looked at diversity and equality, as well as selection and appointment. And I made the note that selection and appointment would actually require some of the deepest policy thought because of the difficulty in achieving a balance between what you need in policy coherence and the importance of competence and effectiveness in implementation of policy. So these are matters which have been discussed for some time, and reference was made to the sort of global thrust and recognition of the importance of management principles being taken from the private sector into the public sector, given the public good of efficiency and effectiveness that would nationally manifest. So I'm not going back into all of the elements, but it was, it's interesting to recognize that then the matter of selection and appointment was in its very, very nascent discussion, just a line or two. And here we are now seeking to build out the framework for it. And again, in so doing, I don't believe all the problems will have been solved. In fact, some of these provisions themselves, I'm sure in the debate it will be raised, that there are challenges inherent even in the provisions as they have been set out. But it is a work in progress, and I do think we should all recognize the public good that exists in corporate governance as applied within the the public sector. I note as well that at the time that I presented, my presentation referred to the 190 public bodies in Jamaica. And the brief that, of course, was provided by the current Ministry of Finance and Public Service has identified us now as having 146 as a result of the public sector transformation program, which is streamlining, modernizing, and optimizing how it is that we retain useful agencies and ensure that their utility is optimized for the public good. So all citizens, we recognize, have a vested interest in seeing public bodies optimizing the meeting of their mandates, and this is with good reason. The operation of these 146 active public bodies in Jamaica impacts the lives of citizens on a daily basis practically, and their boards and managers have under their control and management a vast amount of state resources. So improving their structures in order to improve their operations is of great importance to the delivery of service to the people of Jamaica and to our collective success as a country. So a critical part of this must be increasing the transparency and structure around the process of board appointments and the subject, of course, of the regulations before us today. So Regulation 1, without more, Mr. President, provides the short title, and it sets out that the fact that the regulations will come into effect 4 months after the date of publication in the Gazette. This is the general operation date for the regulations that will allow some of the work that has already started in terms of actually establishing the IT infrastructure for the database. But again, you know, it's quite unusual to have a date placed in your regulations that is so fixed with something that might be subject to vagaries and vicissitudes of life, as we call them when we're speaking about, you know, in the common law, the things that can change your intended timeline. Mr. President, the regulations also provide for some regulations or some aspects of the regulations to come into effect 10 months after the gazetting, and I will speak more specifically to those as well. But the intention generally is to work towards the phased operationalization of the provisions here. Regulations 10 through 16 and Regulation 18, as well as the second schedule, those are the ones that will come into effect in 10 months rather after the first gazetting, while the rest of the body of regulations will come into effect 4 months after. So the process of establishing the secretariat, recruiting the persons who the financial secretary will work with or who will work for the financial secretary in terms of the hiring and staff to implement the work of the database and its management, that process will certainly come into effect after the 4-month period. Mr. President, the Regulation 2 sets out the critical definitions which are needed to understand how the regulations are to work. Words such as database, the phrase due diligence checks, and the context within which it will be used, the prospective directors, applicants, major undertakings for the purposes of understanding what boards can and cannot do. These are all defined in Regulation 2. We'll say more further about them as we go along because it's important to understand the context within which they're used, and simply stating them as they are may not take us very far. So, Mr. President, the matter of the applicant is one that is particularly groundbreaking and one that will be addressed more significantly. But it is critical in terms of what I'll term the democratization, the deepening of the democratization in one sense. of the process, with the introduction of the fact that individuals can now apply to be considered for appointment to the board of a public body. And I'm sure all of us in political life have at one point or another been asked, how can I serve? How can I become a part of public service, to serve on a board? And now it is that persons can, if they do believe that they have the appropriate skills and competencies, that they can apply to the, they will be able to, rather, on the passage of this and the passage of the relevant time period, to apply to the financial secretary for consideration for selection. And that is really for consideration, and that is an absolute game changer in respect of opening up the possibilities for persons to participate in public service. So this is something that we'll look at further when we reach Regulation 4, which we are just about to do, but it is a particularly important benefit. So Regulation 3 sets out exclusions to the applications of these regulations. They exclude the boards of educational institutions, save where they are public bodies, like UTEC and Edna Manley, for example. They are public bodies, although educational institutions. And the regulations also will not apply to ex officio members of the board. So persons who are, by virtue of the post that they hold, whether permanent secretary or head of a particular agency, they are already a part of the system, and in that they would have gone through some vetting by the organizations of which they are members, of which they represent, and accordingly they would be determined to be appropriate for appointment, notwithstanding, or rather without any further examination under these regulations specifically. Regulation 4 provides that the financial secretary will be responsible for the establishment of the database of prospective directors. And this is a pivotal part of meeting the goal of transparency in the selection and appointment of prospective directors. So information in this database, such as the name, knowledge, skills, and experience of prospective directors, will be subject to a verification check to ensure the veracity of the information. So persons certainly will submit a CV, which will say their work experience, their areas of skills and their certification, their educational history, and there will be a basic process whereby the financial secretary will verify that information. So if I say I went to UE and I got a second-class honors in X, then they will check with UE to see that I did in fact attend there during the given years, and I was in fact awarded a degree in the subject I have said and at the level that I have said. If I say I worked at X or Y bank during this particular period, and these are the positions I held and the roles I performed, then there will be a verification of that process as well. Because certainly, as you widen a process so that the ability of persons to, well, a broader set of uncertainties and unknown quantities would insert themselves in the process. So you must have verification of these elements. And certainly the value of it would not need to be overstated. It would be clear to us all. The database will therefore be established within the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. It will be electronic, as I indicated earlier, and appropriate staff will be recruited and designated to carry out the duties related to administration and of the provisions, the financial secretary having ultimate responsibility for administration of the database. Regulation 5 speaks to its maintenance, the fact that it must be kept in a secure and reliable facility. And of course, the question arises, well, who will have access to this information? So public's right to information is certainly already provided for in law under the Access to Information Act, under the Data Protection Act. These will govern access to a particular extent, but provided for in these regulations certainly is the fact that the public will have access by way of a request in writing to the financial secretary, which is provided for in Regulation 6, to request the names of current directors of boards, the boards on which they're sitting, and their competencies. So the public can actually write to ask the financial secretary to ask who are the directors sitting on this board. If it happens to not be on the website of the board, of course, it would be already available in the public, and also asking what their competencies would be. And it's anticipated that the electronic system will provide this readily and allow for ease of reporting on matters such as that. The regulation 7, of course, 7.1 and 7.2 set out these matters in relation to the information that can be provided. 7.2 also provides for the confidentiality of the information otherwise held in the database. So prospective directors can be assured of the confidentiality of the information shared and integrity of the system in which their information will be stored. Certainly, your address, any personal information, your marital status, how many children you have, that type of thing that might be on a CV, that might be on the information that was submitted. That is not information that will be shared with the public, that can be requested by the public. Those matters would be retained as confidential. Regulation 8 provides for the making of changes to the database as it relates to prospective directors. So if you are a prospective director and you check your information and you see that there is something incorrect, you can notify the financial secretary, and this financial secretary will make the amendment, or on her own initiative or in response to a request, the financial secretary may correct or update the information in the database. And of course, the regulation provides for the advice to the director of such changes or updates. Regulation 9 addresses the matter of eligibility for inclusion in the database. So Regulation 9.1 sets that a person may be included by nomination or personal application. I spoke to the latter earlier, but nominations may be made also by groups set out in the first schedule of the regulations, which include but are not limited to professional bodies, business associations, trade unions, public sector agencies representing special interest areas such as gender affairs, children and youth, consumer affairs, persons with disabilities, groups, associations may make nominations for their inclusion in the database. Persons can also be nominated by political parties registered under the Representation of People's Act. Members of the academic community, civil society groups, such as those representing human rights groups, environmental actions, etc., they can all make recommendations. And the current chairman or board members and portfolio ministers and permanent secretaries may also nominate persons to be considered for appointment to boards of public bodies and therefore for inclusion in the database. So all of these categories are set out in the first schedule, which is not limited. And it's important. It's important for us to recognize, when I speak about the democratization of the process, and indeed its increased inclusivity. This is part of yet another part of the whole concept of inclusive development and inclusive economic growth and development. And I think something to be welcomed, because I think maybe now these groups will focus more and think more about persons, about the competencies of their membership and persons around them who may be appropriate for nomination. Mr. President, the provision therefore really demonstrates our commitment to participatory government, to diversity, and it highlights the recognition of the need to have the widest possible cross-section of Jamaicans involved and represented in important decision-making towards the growth and development of Jamaica, but recognizing, of course, competence at the core. So the positive benefit of the provision, Mr. President, goes so deeply beyond what exists now, that it really has to be recognized for its progressive nature, and definitely should be welcomed again as a step in the right direction in giving Jamaicans a deeper stake or stronger stake in their own growth and development. Mr. President, it bears repeating again that no one will be included in the database save those persons for whom a due diligence check has determined that they have the requisite knowledge, skills, and experience for appointment to a particular public board. So everyone can apply, but you still have to have competence. You still have to have the skills and experience that are required for appointment to a board. And we do hope that persons in the private sector, in the NGO sphere, who know their competencies and experience will put themselves forward for consideration so soon as the ministry extends the application process to the public, or rather opens it to the public. Mr. President, all of that being said, Regulation 9.2 addresses the categories of persons who would not be eligible for inclusion. And these include a member of either of the Houses of Parliament, councillors of local authorities, persons disqualified from serving under the Companies Act, a bankrupt, persons with mental disorders. Again, this is taking Dr. Longmore from the Mental Health Act, from which all fruit grows, and which we know needs to be amended and will be amended. The review is underway, but the language for its jurisprudential certainty is used until such day. So we recognize and state to the community that has a broad sensitivity and, of course, responsibility for matters of mental health that
just a clarification or elucidation I'm asking for, if you would yield. In terms of the ineligibility, you spoke to the first two categories being members of parliament or members of local government councils. What is not clear is if the person is already appointed, what is their status when the regulations come into effect?
There is nothing that will invalidate the appointments that have already been made. And so 22 provides for, Regulation 22 states expressly, for the avoidance of doubt, nothing in these regulations shall be construed as invalidating the appointment of a board made within 10 months after the date of publication, so that deals with the future, but there's also nothing invalidating those made before. So what will happen is that appointments in place will subsist. Appointments made after the regulations take effect will need to be guided by the regulations. So who currently sit, they may continue until the completion of their tenure, right?
Thank you, Senator Bunting, for that clarification.
Yes, no, it's an important point. It's an important point. And it feeds into the fact that the separation that's being undertaken is not intended to cast political representatives as corrupt or as any setting the base to say that their removal automatically sanitizes boards and solves all governance issues. It is not intended to feed into the narrative to which I believe Senator Braham referred earlier. It is a devolution that takes place and that has taken place elsewhere globally in terms of removing even the perception of conflict of interest and separating the political directorate more concretely from the operational sides of government. It is not intended to cast political representatives in a negative light, so we should be careful not to encourage that narrative. And also to recognize that it does produce certain challenges, because where you have, for example, excellent senators such as Senator Braham and Senator Webby, who also are excellent board chairmen, and others, and others, others who are not at all not at all focused on self-promotion. No, but of course, including several, you know, they're not only of unquestioned integrity, knowledge, experience, and ability, such as Senator Tavares Finson, whose cultural knowledge which he brings to the National Gallery is without parallel. So, but you have to make you have to make choices. We will have to make choices within the political directorate across the aisle as to where preferred service is to be placed. Senator Gale is another example. Senator Hill, you were chair of the Water Commission and did incredible work transforming many aspects of that body's operation. So the question, it goes without saying that implementation of these regulations will therefore pose their own challenges. But the increase in inclusion and the broadening of the base of public service through these mechanisms has won the day in these discussions. And so we work towards their effective implementation and these governance practices. And we seek to get the best that we can at this point, for as long as we can anyway, senators who are presently caught between the words on these pages. But Regulation 10, Mr. President, outlines the selection procedures. Each board is required, of course, to, under the policy guidelines which already exist, to have a competency profile. And this is an instrument that outlines the core and key competencies that are required of directors to serve on boards of each public body. And the selection procedure requires the financial secretary to prepare a list of all eligible prospective directors from the database who meet the competency profile of the respective board. And this list will then be given to the appointing authority, which remains the Minister of Government, but in some cases, of course, is His Excellency the Governor General or another body or authority in the case where it is appointing a subsidiary, for example. And it is from this list that's given to the appointed authority that the prospective directors will be selected for consideration for appointment, and that power remains with Cabinet. So at the end of the day, the appointing mechanism is not changing, but the selection mechanism for such appointment, that will have fundamentally changed. And again, a huge cultural shift and a huge shift in execution of policy, but we will see how it is that it unfolds, and we certainly will work towards the best result. Mr. President, whereas Regulation 9.2 specifically outlines the categories of persons not eligible for inclusion in the database, Regulation 10.4 outlines the categories of persons that are ineligible for selection. So there is, for inclusion, there's a process for inclusion in the database, and then there is your eligibility for selection for appointment to a particular board. If you're a former chief executive of the same public body for which you are being considered for appointment, and you held post for 3 years, immediately before, for any time rather shorter than 3 years, prior to the proposal being made for your appointment, then you would not be eligible. So a CEO cannot be eligible to be appointed to a board if they have served as CEO for that agency up to 3 years or less prior to the proposal for their appointment. This is to allow for what's called a cooling off period between their service as in management and their service as a director, to ensure separation of the roles and the knowledge and exercise of authority. Mr. President, a person with or without, or rather with an existing legal dispute or a connected party with a legal dispute against a public body would not be considered eligible to sit on that public body. If I am suing the National Water Commission, then That's why I'm not. But I believe there is a broken pipe, which I have seen, which I passed yesterday and today, and I'll speak to you about that before. But if you are suing a body, then you should not be eligible to sit on the board of that body. Of course, the board will have to consider matters of liability and conflict of interest and your access to information that speaks to itself for itself and will be another category of ineligibility. Mr. President, a person will be ineligible if so found under the terms of the Enabling Act or other constituent documents of that body. And certainly if a person, if a person sits on 3 public body agencies, not including any subsidiaries, then those persons would not be eligible for further appointments. We are all aware, Mr. President, again, notwithstanding the incredible capacity of certain individuals, that as a rule, spreading oneself too thin, so to speak, can deliver less than optimal results in the areas in which you deliver your service. And accordingly, it is intended to sort of move away from the very same persons being selected all the time for service, when in fact there are talented candidates who may be identified elsewhere from whom selections may be made. If the person does not satisfy required competencies for the respective board, they too will not be eligible. And if a person becomes incapacitated to the extent that that incapacitation would affect the person's performance, then such persons would also be ineligible. So ensuring that skills and competence are the required skills and competencies for each public body to meet their management needs is an important objective of these regulations. And these aspects will not be brought into effect. These are those, among those regulations that would come into effect until 10 months, 10 months after the publication of the regulations, so that the actual research and the due diligence can be carried out around these areas. Concomitantly, Mr. President, there is a need to ensure that persons of good character and integrity are placed in bodies which are of particular strategic importance. And Regulation 11 outlines the category of public bodies for which fit and proper tests will be required. So beyond the verification and the due diligence, there's also a fit and proper requirement for particular categories of boards. So Regulation 11 sets out that fit and proper tests are to be carried out for bodies that provide financial services, those that regulate the financial and gaming sectors, and those of strategic importance. And those deemed of strategic importance are set out in the 2nd schedule of the regulations. And by strategic importance, we're saying that they have a sizable asset base, they're considered as having significant economic impact, and that they therefore can pose a fiscal risk. And these include the National Water Commission, the Port Authority, the National Housing Trust, Heart Trust NTSA, and Petrojam Limited. These are all bodies. The asset size and the economic importance, of course, go without saying and need no emphasis. The list is not exhaustive, Mr. President, and will be subject to periodic review as well, based on changing national circumstances. Mr. President, Regulation 12 sets out the criteria for a prospective director being deemed fit and proper. And they include never having been convicted of an offense involving dishonesty or moral turpitude, not being bankrupt, and having no record of impropriety in the handling of monies. And the person is one considered to be of probity, who is likely to exercise competence, diligence, and sound judgment, among others. Regulation 13 provides for appointments to the board, for them to be done, importantly, with the consent in writing of the prospective director being given within 14 days of being notified of your appointment. And Regulation 13.4 provides that the total membership of the board must have a minimum of 30% male or 30% female directors, so that you can, of course, have more of either, but you would have at least 30 of either. And the remaining members can be a combination, but not a combined gender, Mr. President, as I see your furrowed brow. Okay. Mr. President, the provision thereby sets out a minimum gender representation requirement in the regulations, consistent not only with global best practices, but furthering our national goal of diversity and equity, and a society in which women and men have equal opportunities to serve and contribute to national development. Mr. President, Regulation 14 addresses the restriction on appointment of the chairman. It says that a chairman should not simultaneously chair more than 3 public bodies, although this will not include boards of subsidiaries. So where there is a repetition of the membership of the board and there is a clear synergy, then the joint chairmanship is something which can, of course, be recognized as synergistic rather than a stretched circumstances. And it's thought that they will be able to offer the time and energy necessary to that business if aligned. Mr. President, Regulation 15 sets out the tenure of the chairman, providing that they shall not serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. And Regulation 16 provides for reappointment of directors. It sets limits on service as well, and states that while the appointing authority may reappoint any director from the outgoing board of a public body, one is not automatically entitled to be reappointed except as it is prescribed in the Enabling Act or constituent documents of the public body. If a director has already served on the board for more than one or more terms consecutively, amounting in the aggregate to 10 years, subject to the Enabling Act or constituent documents, then that person will not be reappointed. Mr. President, this is important to ensure that persons with fresh and innovative ideas are considered for board appointments, and it's also important for the issue of continuity. So this regulation also provides, therefore, subject to the Enabling Act and constituent documents of the body, that the appointing authority shall select for reappointment at least 1/3 or 3, whichever is less, of the members of an outgoing board at the end of the board's term, or where there's a change of government or a change of minister, and where the minister makes a decision to appoint a new board. So this means that not only would you not have a break you would not have a total break in institutional knowledge on the board. It wouldn't only depend on management to properly brief a board. You would have directors who would carry forward their understanding of the board's history, at least its immediate history. No, because remember, they're excluded from the regs. So they would be considered part of the broader institutional framework, right? But Mr. President, on the function of continuity and ensuring that an entire board now needs to be rebriefed and resensitized, the learning curve that can result in loss of strategic insights from previous board members, that would be mitigated by the retention of 3 or no less than 1/3. Mr. President, this is, we believe, a way in which the impartial administration of the people's business may be undertaken and continue to contribute to public body continuity. Regulation 17 addresses the revocation of appointments, Mr. President, and sets out when the appointing authority can revoke the appointment of a director. Mr. President, with the most careful approach to the appointment of directors, things can still go awry, and therefore the matter of revocation also must be considered in these regulations. The bases include absence from duty for 3 consecutive meetings, for reasons not deemed satisfactory by the appointing authority or as set out in the Enabling Act or constituent documents, incapacitation that affects the performance of the director's duty, and misconduct or breach of duty of care. Mr. President, Regulation 18 addresses how to treat vacancies and simply provides that the FS should be notified and another director appointed from the database, save, again, in respect of the ex officio appointee, who would be treated quite simply as any other ex officio appointee. That is not part of the database and would be dealt with by the appointing or recommending agency. Mr. President, Regulation 19 codifies the long-held practice of the publication of appointment of directors in the Gazette, and Regulation 20 sets out provisions on board restrictions and actions during the transition period. So this is very important, Mr. President. Again, the transition period is defined as the period from the date on which a writ of election is issued by the Governor General, and it extends to the date on which persons are appointed by the appointing authority to serve as members, and in accordance with relevant laws, except for circumstances referred to in paragraph A, the period from the date on which a minister is appointed until the date on which that minister appoints a new board or requests in writing that the board continues. So the transition period covers a period when a general election is called, and the period, rather, when an election is called, and the period when a new minister is appointed, so that there is a limit on the type of transaction that a board can undertake. And that is, again, in the interests of good governance, so nothing, no major undertaking, as, major sale of shares, any massive contracts, and those are treated within the definition section. Those will not be permitted during that period of time to ensure, again, sensible governance and well-considered matters around by the board. There are periods, of course, Mr. President, where a board would normally, these are periods where a board would normally resign to allow a new administration or minister to make appointments to boards. And while certain protocols and conventions have developed and have been followed in this period, the importance here for cohesion is to send clear signals as to how matters should be treated within these periods. So the resignations, etc., would proceed as normal. However, there should be no new or major undertaking, save with the approval of the relevant accounting officer, and the major undertaking has been defined to mean the acquisition of assets or assumption of obligations of a certain value, usually requiring board approval. So that, of course, would be understood within the particular provisions and responsibilities of that board. They shall not make any new appointments, usually requiring board approval, although they can make appointments to positions ordinarily requiring board approval where the appointment was negotiated and contracted before. So the intention is to ensure continuity, but not to permit wrongdoing, or let me not call it wrongdoing, but improper decision making. And they must conduct a performance appraisal for the CEO or president or executive director, Mr. President, and of course, they must submit the resignation, which, however, won't take effect until a new board is appointed, again ensuring that there is no gridlock in the performance of the duties that are required by a board just because there is an election process underway. So, Mr. President, Regulation 21 defines the circumstances for change in board membership, and they include where there's a change of government, where there's a change of responsible minister and he makes a decision to appoint a new board, where there's a resignation or revocation, where there's a cessation of term of appointment, and where there is a death of a director or incapacitation. So, Mr. President, I had indicated earlier that the issue of the regulations coming into effect 4 days after Gazette, save and except those which have to do with selection and appointment, which come into effect 10 years, or scheduled to come into effect 10 months after the date of publication. The intention clearly would be that if there are boards that expire during this period and have to be reappointed or have to be appointed, then those would continue to be appointed in the normal course if it is that the circumstances do not allow these guidelines to be applied to those appointments. There is time that is required, Mr. President, for public education on the requirements of the law, to not only allow the administrators to put measures in place to fulfill the objectives and the time to ensure compliance, but also to encourage persons to come forward and for nominations to be made. The 2 schedules are set out for inclusion, as I've described them earlier. And it is in this context, Mr. President, that the government intends to continue to fulfill its commitment to good corporate governance practices, to foster transparency, and to encourage participation in the management and oversight of public bodies. I therefore now invite members on both sides to contribute to the debate and to support the affirmation of these regulations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I recognize and understand the situation, and so my presentation will not be extensive. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to the debate on the public public management bodies regulations, and in doing so, Mr. President, I want to start by making some prefacing remarks, and then I have 2 issues that I want to raise, but fundamentally the opposition supports the thrust of the regulations. And I want to start out by pointing to the members of this honorable chamber that in 1962, we gained political independence, and upon gaining political independence, we adopted the Westminster system of government, which basically has 3 major arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. In a sense, it mirrors in a significant way our colonial experience, save and except that we opted to codify our Constitution and have a document which chronicles our governance arrangements. And in principle, the Westminster system is anchored on what we who are involved in political science regard as the gentlemanly conduct and the ladylike conduct, I want to be gender sensitive, of the operatives of the system. But what has happened in Jamaica over the past 60 years is that we have seen some individuals, and I want to stress because I don't want to make sweeping generalization. We have seen some individuals venturing into the system that have sought to corrupt the system and bring bad name to certain arms of the governance arrangement. In the executive, you have the cabinet and you have the various administrative bodies which the public sector boards would fall apart. And I want to zero in on that in my presentation because that is the fulcrum of the reason why we are here and passing these regulations. Because individuals who have ventured into the management of our public bodies have sought to some individuals, and I'm going to be very clear on that, Senator Brigham, that some individuals have sought to corrupt the system and bring the system into disrepute. And because of that, measures must be put in place to ensure that our public sector bodies are properly managed and selfish, greedy, and thieving individuals don't venture into the space and plunder public money. You know, Mr. President, I pride myself as one who hailed from humble family background, and I've said it on a number of occasions in this honorable Senate. And when I ventured into national politics in 1998, I vowed that never must Jamaica Dean Price in Baileysville, St. Mary, hear her blind son name call in any shenanigans, in any act of corruption. Because you see, my mission is to make life a little better for my Jamaican brothers and sisters who are less fortunate than all of us inside this honorable chamber. And so my mission was never to how much I can line my pocket with public money. And so, Senator Brigham, just like yourself, because although you talk some things that I don't agree with today, though, I see you as a good man, you know. But I tell you, nonetheless, I come inside this space here, and I have never ventured in any activity that would cause my pockets to be filled with public money. I don't believe in it. It is wrong. No. The riches would have come through hard work and investment in education. And you see, I am satisfied, Senator Brigham, with what education have done for me and what it has allowed me to earn. Well, you know, we invest the little pennies that we earn and it's multiplied. And, you know, I'm a member of the Adventist Church and I believe in returning my tithe. And so when I return my 1/10 to the Lord, he says that he will open up the windows of heaven so that there will be not room enough to withhold and stand the blessings that he has been bestowing. And I have felt that. But I say to this honorable chamber that we can't, those who are involved in the management of public boards, man. And it don't matter where them come from, you know. It don't matter if them green or if them orange, the plundering of public resources must stop. The thieving must stop. Because when I went through the questions that were asked by me, and the leader of government business presented the answers last week, I saw a fundamental challenge for the government to implement a need, which is to make schools accessible for persons with disabilities. But the government can't do it because there are people who are managing public resources, who are plundering public resources, so little people like the disabled can get what they're supposed to get. You know, when you look at the budget, you know, and though it represents a big increase over previous years, you know, for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, you know, it's $200 million, you know. $200 million, but I have seen the wanton waste and corruption that has taken place over the years where public sector bodies are concerned, and this is depriving vulnerable groups like persons with disabilities of vital resources that would contribute to their inclusion in the mainstream of our society. And so those who are plundering public resources must understand, say, that they are robbing the blind, they are robbing the deaf, they are robbing the physically disabled, they are robbing those with intellectual disabilities. Because every time they plunder public resources, they are minimizing state resources to respond to the needs of these individuals. And the Bible, which we all are subject to in this honorable house, you know, tell you about when you rob the poor and the marginalized, what is likely to happen to you. And I want to make an appeal to those who are entrusted with responsibility to manage these public sector boards, to remember that when you are appointed, you are charged with the responsibility to make sure that you manage the state resources to the best of your ability so that it caters to the poor and the marginalized and contribute to the growth and development of our country. Mr. President, there are two specific issues that I have picked up in the regulations that I am of concern, and I take note that the minister clarified one as it relates to what would happen to those parliamentarians like Senator Gale, Senator Webby, Senator Braham, who are serving boards, public sector boards, and what would happen to them when the regulation comes into effect between 4 to 10 months' time. And I take note of the explanation, but I think there needs to be greater clarity based on what is in the regulation, because I had that in mind and to ask before Senator Bunting made his intervention, and we need to get, as much clarity as possible on that particular issue. The other issue is as it relates to again, the eligibility, those who are ineligible, and it speaks to individual with mental disorder. And again, Minister, I hear you mention it, and I consistently bring it to the attention of the Senate, and I'm not going to stop bringing it on the floor of the Senate, Senator Longmore, until the Mental Health Act is fundamentally reformed. Because mental disorder is a broad categorization of individuals with different types of mental disabilities. So you have individuals who suffer from chronic depression. That is a mental disorder. You have individuals who suffer from anxiety disorder. That is a mental disorder. But when you make a broad categorization like mental disorder now, you exclude those individuals, and those are milder forms of mental illness that wouldn't preclude those individuals from participating in an efficacious manner in public sector board management. And I hope, Minister, begging and appealing to the three of you who are a part of Cabinet to urge the Ministry of Health to put the reforms to the Mental Health Act on a fast track. I want to also see some other things with that piece of legislation really being jettisoned from modern day legislative architecture, because the whole issue of medical boarding still forms a part of that legislation, and it have no place in modern day disability legislation, especially when the Disabilities Act is going to come into force on the 14th of February, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will become localized. So I want to raise and put that issue on the table. And the final observation that I want to make, Mr. President, is that in the regulations I see consistent mention of the financial secretary and the role that the financial secretary will play in the implementation of this very important piece of regulation. And as I examined the different responsibilities that are entrusted upon the financial secretary, I said to myself, what should happen if a financial secretary should abdicate his or her fiduciary responsibility in terms of the regulations of the public sector management regulation? What penalties, what sanctions are there to ensure that any financial secretary don't fall out of line? Don't fall out of line, and make sure that they pay attention to what the public sector management regulations require him or her to do. And I think, Minister, that is something that needs some clarification and needs addressing. It's a deficiency that I've seen in the regulation that needs to be addressed. Mr. President, as I take my seat, and I want to wish all the members of this honorable chamber all the best for the Yuletide season and for the new year. Senator Samuda, you have come under a lot of commendation. Well, you will tell him. Yes, come for a lot of commendation. And, you know, I will tell you, it's one member of the government team that I am very proud of. I say to people that sometimes when Senator Samuda speaks, you cringe in your shoes, you know, sometimes, because, you know, you don't necessarily agree with what he's saying, but, you know, it's a part of the cut and thrust of the politics, but is somebody that harbors no grudge, no ill will, no bad feeling against you. And that is the nature of the democracy. You know, I mean, we are here in this space and the debate will get very heated sometimes. But for me, when it's done, it's done. And I move on. And I want to wish all the members of the Honorable Chamber all the best for the rest of the year, and be refreshed and come back in 2022 to do the people's business and do so with dignity and honesty. And where possible, tell those who are appointed to public sector board, say we not in the teeth in the Senate. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris. We understand that you have to leave now. Would you please convey to your family the best wishes of all of us? And I hope for your family that you have a peaceful, safe, and healthy Christmas season. The Senate will now rise for, the Senate will now rise for half an hour. Senator Golden, I think some of our members might have slipped out already. The Senate will now resume at 3:15, no, sir? At 3:15.